And we're live. It is Tuesday, November 19th, 2024, the year of our Lord, 8 o'clock a.m., and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, a fucking revolution in morning television. I'm Benjamin Wittes from the Hammock Studio. I have no idea who's showing up today. I would like to point out that in an effort to vindicate my predictions of yesterday, the Ukrainian government confirmed, I think to the New York Times or maybe to the Washington Post, I can't remember which news organization sent me an alert moments ago, that it had used ATACMS to target things inside of Russia. I would just like the record to reflect that I said yesterday that they would do that quickly in order to make a statement, as well as in order to start using the advantage that this gives them. I am an unpopular man this morning, and I want to talk about why. I'm an unpopular man because I wrote a modest little piece yesterday on Lawfare entitled In Defense of Merrick Garland. And I expected that nobody would like this piece. I did not expect the ferocious hatred that it is getting on Blue Sky, most of it not directed at me, most of it directed at Merrick Garland. I have to say, I expected it to be unpopular. I don't think I expected it to be quite as unpopular as it is. So let me start by saying what the piece argues. And then I want to do a little bit of a meta defense of the piece and the argument. So as you probably know, a lot of people blame Merrick Garland for the election of Donald Trump the second time. And I sort of joke in the piece, Merrick Garland is the new Jim Comey, because every time Trump gets elected, we need some law enforcement operation that fails in order to blame it on, because, God forbid we should face the fact that tens of millions of Americans find this man and this political movement attractive. Hold that thought for a second. So 8 years ago, it was Jim Comey and the Comey letter that changed everything. Now, I've never honestly believed this. Whatever you think the merits of the Comey letter were, according to, for example, Nate Silver, Trump had a 20% chance of winning before the Comey letter, and he had a 28% chance of winning on Election Day, which is to say there was a substantial chance before and after the Comey letter that Trump was going to win, and he did. And the idea that we shift all the blame for a large percentage of the country finding Trump attractive to a letter from a law enforcement official to Congress strikes me as sort of facile. Moreover, I also, by the way, feel that way about Hillary Clinton. I don't think she was a dreadful candidate. I don't think she was I don't think she was the fact that she had the flu made a difference. I think we need to face the reality that a certain group of people in the United States who constitute something approaching a plurality or maybe a majority simply do not find this offensive and do not find this style of leadership toxic. And by the way, that does not make the United States singular. That is true of most democratic countries at this point. Marine Le Pen comes within a relatively small margin of becoming president of France. Giorgia Meloni is the prime minister of Italy. The Alternative for Deutschland does pretty well. As Antti Ruokonen, who has been good enough to join us this morning, pointed out the other day, the Finns party or their splinters or their hangers-on have a real electoral coalition in Finland. There's something going on here that is not about whether Jim Comey writes letters. Moreover, we have not one, but two controls. We have the 2000 election, the 2020 election, in which, Jim Comey was not running the FBI, and a good choice of mug, Auntie. We have a we have in which Donald Trump did better. He got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. And that was despite the fact that Jim Comey's correspondence got kept to himself the whole time. Then we have this year, where his vote goes up a lot. I mean, not a lot in percentage terms, but in terms of the percentage of the electorate that's voting for Trump, goes up by 2 or 3 points. And again, Jim Comey didn't write any public letters. So I think, to blame the 2016 election on Comey strikes me as facile at this point. All of which brings me to Merrick Garland. I do not doubt, as Roger Parloff, who has been good enough to join us, and many others have argued, that the investigation that led to the January 6th indictment could have been done faster. I don't doubt that. I'm not arguing that this investigation was done with all the speed and urgency that it required. I do think there are some hard questions to ask the Justice Department, although the hardest question is not about the January 6th investigation in my mind. The hardest question is why the heck the classified documents case was brought in Florida, not in D.C. And that's actually a question for Jack Smith, not for Merrick Garland. But the notion that given everything that's happened since those cases were filed, that the Supreme Court would have let this case go to trial before the election strikes me as something near indefensible. If you imagine that this case was brought a year and a half earlier or a year earlier, do you really think we're a year from trial but for Trump's election? We haven't even gotten a district court ruling on what material is and isn't usable because of the immunity stuff. We don't know whether we're going to have one round of further immunity appeals or 5. This case is nowhere near going to trial. And so I want to say, just to all of the people on Blue Sky who are really angry at me this morning and last night for saying that whatever Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco's faults, whatever lack of urgency that they had, this was not the rate limiting step. This was not what caused Donald Trump to be elected. And by the way, if you are looking for someone to blame in the coalition of the Democratic world, and by that I mean the small d Democratic world, include a lot of Republicans in it, include Liz Cheney, include Adam Kinzinger, include the many career officials in the Department of Justice who are Republicans. If you're looking for somebody to blame in that world, instead of looking at what's going on in the electorate, you are missing the point. It's not the Attorney General's fault. I don't want to hear any more criticism of Kamala Harris either. She did what she was supposed to do. She made the case. Something is going on in the electorate that we need to think about. That's it for my rant this morning. I stand by my piece in defense of Merrick Garland. If you don't like it, there's a really good option for you. You cannot read me. And, and if you disagree with it, and Roger may well disagree with it because he has a very different view of the Justice Department than I do. So we're going to get to that in just a second. If you disagree with it, fine. That's fine. I'm not always right. I don't hold myself out as always right, although I was right yesterday about Ukraine using ATACMS very quickly. I just want to point out. So argue with me at your own peril. But I concede that I am not always right. If your response to that piece is to tweet bile at Merrick Garland, something's wrong. And it's not something with the piece. Antti Ruokonen, Finn extraordinaire, what's on your mind?
Well, there's actually two things. First of which is that I think one aspect that is not often getting enough attention is that there's been sustained Russian influence operations ongoing in all across Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere too. And how that's affected the most recent election, that's very difficult to tell, but I would hazard a guess that there is some effect.
So,
and sorry.
Can I respond to that before you go on?
Please.
So, I think the evidence that Russia has a direct electoral effect with influence operations is not all that strong. The evidence that they've had a huge effect on general public opinion, particularly on the right and the far left, is overwhelming. And the evidence of that, by the way, doesn't require any subtlety. It doesn't require, it's just that, there is a magic confluence between right-wing, far-right talking points and even some moderate right talking points and far-left talking points and Russian propaganda. And they are growing closer together over time, and that is because the Russians have successfully infiltrated the ecosystem. Now, how you approach thinking about the immediate direct electoral effect is a different question, and I think a much harder question. But there's simply no doubt that that the Russians are having an impact on the electoral, the partisan media environment. Your second point.
Yeah. Well, to do with the first point, actually, there was a brouhaha locally in Finland when one of our most recent European parliamentary elections winner announced that yes, that we're already at war with Russia. It's just not a kinetic war, and I think that also speaks to the fact, and also that there was a brouhaha from making that statement to begin with. But the second thing is that I wanted to say that in Finland there was just today in the parliament there was a session where actually the topic of Ukraine was the chief point, and it was good to see that every major political party agreed that Ukraine needs the best help that we can provide them. And I think our foreign minister said something along the lines that Ukraine deserves to be free to chart its own course, and we're going to assist them to do that.
Well, that is excellent news. A reminder to those who are not militarily inclined that Finland is the only country in Europe that has successfully defended its independence from sustained Russian military attack. Live to tell the tale, live to fight another day. And it did it without NATO. The Finns have some unique military capabilities, particularly involving hiding in snow and snipering at Russian troops. look, the next 4 years of protecting Ukraine is going to be a crowdsourced effort. And the more countries, and Finland's already been seriously involved, but the more countries get more seriously involved and allow the Ukrainians the use of their unique capabilities, the better. I will just say on Finnish-Russian relations, I was in Helsinki with Antti for obvious reasons that you can imagine, and was just shocked at the size of the Russian embassy compound in Helsinki, um, which is maybe bigger than the compound in Washington. It's certainly comparable in size. Shocking to me that the Russians are allowed that kind of space in the heart of Helsinki. Antti, good to see you.
You too. See you later.
So, Roger, well, first of all, welcome to Dogshirt TV. Our slogan is a fucking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary aspects is that we do not plan anything. We never know. I never know who the co-hosts are going to be, which in today's case are none. Yesterday, it was the estimable Eve Gamond who seized control of the show and used it to interview me. We also don't know who the guests are going to be. So just so that everybody knows, today I sent out, I think it is technically called a blizzard of general invites to people who are the sort of people who I would want to drop in on Dogshirt TV on a occasional or regular or even, dare I say, daily basis. So now we have a bunch of people who have these links where when they click on them, they just show up on the show. These are the same links that I give the co-hosts. So today we may have somebody else drop in, we may not, but we have Roger. So Roger, what's on your mind this morning?
Well, thank you for the invite.
Thank you for taking it seriously enough to click on the link.
Yeah. So I'm processing a few things. I just read Tom Friedman's op-ed. I don't know if it was today or yesterday.
Well, you're one step ahead of me. What was it about?
He's urging dismissal of all the Trump cases. Obviously, the federal ones are going away, but but he wants the state ones to go away too. And it's a melange. It's a bunch of different arguments that I think I agree with only some, and I don't think this is his specialty. So I don't think it's really a very good column.
Okay, so wait, let's start with that as the premise. One of the two of you is quite expert in the Trump trials, and the other is not. And so I want to start with the question, why does Tom Friedman's opinion on this subject matter?
I guess it matters because a friend of mine just wrote me and said, "Did you see Tom Friedman's article?" And
okay, so people are talking about it. That's a good enough reason for it to matter.
And he agreed with it, and that's why I read it. He seems to accept some of the criticisms of the. He seems to accept the view that they were political to begin with. The only part of it that I sort of agree with is I do think there's a problem with allowing state prosecutors to go after ex-presidents or current presidents, but just because we have probably thousands of jurisdictions with elected DAs and so on, and it's unsustainable.
But haven't we kind of
we have big jurisdictions led by like Ken Paxton and so on. You have there does need to be something. The trouble is dismissing these because of that doesn't guarantee that Ken Paxton won't prosecute Biden. That doesn't get at the problem, and it does create this retroactively clean individual who's not clean. And there needs to be accountability, and it needs to be in the record. So anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Can I ask a dumb question about that? It seems to me that to the extent we're afraid of mischievous prosecutions by state and local officials, and by the way, I do not think that is what happened in either Georgia or New York, although Georgia obviously had serious problems of a different variety. It seems to me one collateral consequence of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling is almost certainly to at least substantively diminish that possibility. That is, imagine Ken Paxton has to make a case against Joe Biden, but he's not allowed to use any official acts, or at least he's going to have to establish that any official acts are, beyond the reasonable scope of the presidency or overcome some undefined presumption of immunity. It's not like Joe Biden has been, moonlighting as a meth dealer or, and like, if you actually had to write that document, I don't care how much you hate him, that's a pretty hard document to write. Why doesn't that solve the problem?
Yeah, it goes. It may go a long way to doing that. I guess that's right, unless somebody in Delaware goes after him for shoplifting or something, which I guess is fair game. But
or for outrages against eyewear fashion.
I like his glasses.
All right, well, then he's safe in your prosecutorial jurisdiction. Can I ask you, so I've been trying to think about the state cases too, one of which we are.
Yes, the other thing is, I keep hoping in that one day that immunity decision will go away. So, and then there will be a problem again. But
right. So I agree with that. I would like to see it go away. But on the other hand, we don't live in a world in which it has an immediate prospect of going away. And so we may as well take the benefits as well as the harms of it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, leaving aside Tom Friedman, how you think the state cases should be resolved. The Georgia Court of Appeals yesterday, without any explanation that I could see, canceled the oral argument, but in the Fani Willis disqualification matter, but didn't dismiss the matter. So we now have a matter on appeal with no scheduled argument in Georgia. Plus, presumably, the case could proceed against every defendant except Trump. And in New York, we are waiting for the prosecutor to say whether he wants to proceed to sentencing or how he wants to proceed. So what do you think the right disposition for both of these cases is for now?
Well, I'm a little bit of a hawk on the New York case. I think he should rule on immunity, and I think that's as you know, I've written about it, and it's not an easy call to me, but it could go either way. And if he finds that immunity issues, if they existed at all, were harmless error, you proceed to sentence, and then you sentence him, and you suspend the sentence until uh, uh, all appeals have been heard, and if necessary, until the end of his term.
And what do you think how probable do you think that outcome is? Is that a
well, of course, we'll know a little bit more by the end of the day, because we're supposed to find out. I'm a little concerned already that the way it went down is that the DA said, okay, let's put it off till till November 19, and we'll formulate our position. Because normally it would be, you would have the defense file their motion today, maybe, saying, here's why we think everything needs to stop. The district attorney would respond, and maybe there'd be a reply, and then there'd be a ruling. Here, it does sound like, for some reason, that they all agreed that the DA should go first. It sounds ominous, like maybe the DA is going to say, yeah, we need to freeze this right now, we need to dismiss it right now. I don't know.
What would be wrong with freezing it right now? It would prevent him from appealing for assuming it was an agreed upon disposition. It would just freeze everything in place until he's a former president. And it would allow, I think, spiritually importantly, at least to me, it would allow all of us to refer to him as a criminal every day of his but no, I'm actually being serious. I think there's a difference between a president, like imagine that Justice Merchan rules on the motion for, and throws the conviction out on the basis of immunity and says, you relied too heavily on that Hope Hicks testimony. You can't do that. So we're gonna. I'm not throwing the case out. I'm not dismissing it, but I am saying a new trial's required. And so then he goes through his presidency as a person who's got a pending indictment against him in New York, but he's innocent until proven guilty. And that's very different from going through his presidency with a criminal conviction that he has not yet been sentenced for, hanging over his head, and like all criminal defendants has the opportunity to file an appeal afterwards. That seems to me like a spiritually important difference, and I'm not sure I would mind, honestly, if that were the outcome.
Well, I think the worst of all worlds is if he does what Friedman wants and says, let's just dismiss it because there was a near majority vote in his favor, and then it's as if this never happened. And he says,
I think we can agree that Justice Thomas Friedman is not presiding over this case, and you and I have both watched this case with a care that Friedman did not, and I have to say I have not detected a ounce of Justice Merchan's willingness to do something that flip.
But I think he's not president yet. This doesn't really distract him from any of his duties. It might require some of his lawyers to show up and make the arguments they've made 132 times before. It doesn't disrupt the transition, assuming. I mean, how can you disrupt a transition like this? And No, I think the criminal process should play out appropriately, and if he's convicted, let that hang over, and let that hang, let that seep in. That's justice is done. He, at one point, Friedman pays tribute to, well, no man's above the law, but he's not an ordinary person. I
Right. No
mean,
man's above the law, but somebody's above the law.
yeah, and let's be able to say who this guy is. Let's keep an open mind. Maybe he'll be a good president, but it doesn't erase what he's done, and we can't. People are trying to silence us, actually, from saying the truth about this guy.
Right. But don't get me wrong. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm saying my question is,
I don't see.
where do you freeze
I mean,
it
I
in
think
place?
if you're afraid that, we can't be afraid that if the correct ruling is, the trial violated the immunity ruling we all disagree with from the Supreme Court, then let's get that out of the way. And I mean, we're stuck with that. I guess he's entitled to that. We shouldn't be extending, a false conviction over the next 4 years. It's not a. It's a weird.
Much as
It's a
I
weird
would
thing.
enjoy that.
Yeah. And but if it's a valid conviction, we should extend that for as long as it lasts up the appellate ladder. And there's always going to be, I don't know how many viewers, if we have any viewers, how many viewers remember, like the asterisk on Roger Maris's 61 home runs.
I certainly do.
There will always be an asterisk here as to whether he was convicted or not, I suspect, because you'll have a conviction. It's going to go away one way or another. It feels that way. But hopefully people will remember.
Here's something that will not go away, however, which I experienced, and I know that Donald Trump experienced too, which is he had to sit in that courtroom for 6 weeks. He had to follow orders from Justice Merchan, whom he plainly loathes. He had to watch while Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen testified about his conduct. And I don't pretend that changed him or anything, or, means something profound. But I do think one of the functions of the judicial system is to force you to be confronted with your conduct. And I watched how uncomfortable he was in that environment. And I don't pretend to understand the nature of the impression that made on him, but it did make some impression on him. I know.
He literally closed his eyes to it. He had to close his eyes to it and pretend to be sleeping.
Right.
That was it was powerful to. I wasn't there, but I was there. Paying attention in real time through all the means possible. And
I was there.
Yeah.
And Maggie Haberman and others reported that he was asleep for large percentage of it, and I don't think he was, actually. I think he was demonstratively pretending to sleep by way of showing disrespect for the proceedings. He would be there with his eyes closed, and then he would suddenly lean over to his lawyer and have a conversation. I think the sleeping was actually quite performative. And I don't, and again, I don't want to overstate the point. I don't, think he's a changed man as a result of it, or that he would never pay off an adult film actress again because, he's reformed. But I do think, if part of the point of a trial is to, make you confront the evidence against you and weigh it in your presence, it did do that. And I have no doubt that it made an impression on him, if only in the sense of causing him to want revenge on the individuals. So what else are you thinking about this morning?
I've had a couple sleepless nights after watching the tape of Steve Vladeck on the panel with Edith Jones.
Edith Jones.
And
so
moderated by James Ho.
So for those who do not know, Edith Jones and James Ho are both judges of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the most conservative court of appeals in the country. Steve Vladeck is, of course, a Georgetown law professor and used to be a frequent Lawfare contributor, now writes mostly on his own Substack, and he's a CNN Supreme Court commentator, critic of the Fifth Circuit, and a good friend of mine. And Edith Jones, who is sort of one of the Fifth Circuit's arch conservatives, read out his tweets in an effort to call him out at a FedSoc panel. I have not watched the video. Roger, what did you make of it, and how demagogic do you think it is?
What I made of it was that is unfortunate. I think all my reactions might be characterized as ad hominem. So I just felt that she wasn't a very good judge or lawyer in the sense of being able to compartmentalize her thoughts and respond in responsive ways and non-politically biased and vindictive ways. Steve has pointed out a lot of problems in the judicial system in terms of procedure and made suggestions, reforms. One thing is single judge districts that are exploited for forum shopping. And this occurs, for instance, in Texas. I think it's the Northern District. It's where Kaczmarek sits. And so a lot of right-wing cases are brought there, knowing he'll be receptive to them, expecting he'll be receptive to them. Anyway, this goes on in other places in Texas too for non-political reasons, like the patent bar cases used to be.
And it goes on throughout the liberal world too. I mean, right. If you're a lib filing a challenge to conservative policy, you have a disproportionate likelihood of filing it in San Francisco.
Yeah. And in the patent bar, for a while it was Marshall, Texas. Now apparently it's Waco, Texas. 23% of all patent cases, maybe in the country, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's some enormous percentage.
In Waco, which is the 23rd largest city in Texas. And so instead of responding to that, they said, her response was, well, I didn't object when that was going on, when people were going to Judge William Wayne Justice. And that's not first of all, it's not really a response. If it was bad with William Wayne Justice, for whom I clerked, uh, and it's bad now, and change it, reform it. Another thing
also, Vladeck was like 10 then.
Yeah,
he wasn't.
Not even. I mean, Judge Justice took senior status in 1990. It's 34 years ago. He died 15 years ago.
Right, that's sort of my point. I mean, Vladeck is significantly younger than I am.
Yeah.
Right. It's quite unreasonable to expect him as a toddler to have been objecting to forum shopping in Texas.
But beyond that, it's also striking that she was shaking in anger about something that ended almost 40 years ago. The Fifth Circuit did not like what was going on as it became right wing, and it eventually took the controversial cases away from my judge. And after I left, and humiliated him, and then he took senior status, I think, in 1990, and then he moved to Austin and finished his career there, totally uncontroversial. But this is still like her motivating force, is to get back at something that occurred 40 years ago, and she's still got this grievance. It still motivates her. She still can't see straight. And the crowd is cheering her. And then he pipes in, Judge Ho, who's young, relatively. And
young and quite extreme.
And he smears my judge. He says something to the effect, I don't have it here. He actually, Judge Justice, went city to city to city so that they could pick him through forum shopping. This is the Fifth Circuit. What is he, chief judge or something? He's on the Fifth Circuit.
Yeah.
I mean, my judge wrote a circuit that was, judges have ridden circuits back to his beloved 18th century. The Eastern District of Texas is big. It goes from Oklahoma to the Gulf Coast. We sat in Tyler, and there was one of the Congress would not fill vacancies, and it wouldn't appoint new judges. So we had 900 civil cases on our docket. And we were based in Tyler, where there was another judge. And while I was there, we went to Beaumont on the Gulf Coast, where there were about 2 other judges. But we also went to Sherman and Paris, where there were no judges. There were courthouses, but no judges. Paris is near Oklahoma. Both of them were in the north. And in Sherman, there was forum shopping. He didn't do it. That was his job. But
so what do you attribute this to? It's particularly weird in Ho, who, does not have a memory of this himself, right? I mean, in her case, you can say, well, maybe it's seared into her, like it's a formative judicial experience. She's been on that court, I think, since the Reagan administration, right? So, maybe it really matters to her, but like there does seem to be some intergenerational grievance here that we will tolerate Kaczmarek and what conservative groups are doing with that court because of, liberal judges' behavior in the 70s and 80s. Why? How do you read Ho's attraction to this and participation in this?
I think, yeah, the right wing is still responding to the image of activist liberal judges, between the Warren Court and about it sort of reached its height with Jack
With the Burger
Weinstein.
Court, really.
Yeah, and with Jack Weinstein in the Eastern District, and maybe my judge in the Eastern District of Weinstein Eastern District of New York, Brooklyn, and my judge in the Eastern District of Texas. But yeah, it's part of this mythology that drives them. But they've been in control of the car practically since Reagan, and the activism is of course all on their end at this point, and it's a tit for tat thing,
And it's a self-image thing. They have an image of themselves as the counterweight to a dominantly liberal activist judicial culture, and they're in fact
backed by the media. That's too. That's
yes.
the
But
media. He was a saint. Have they looked at how they view Scalia?
Well, and also have they looked at the way the conservative media treats them?
Yeah.
And but they haven't really gotten through their heads the idea that there is no dominant liberal judicial culture that they're responding to. They are the dominant judicial culture, or at least the predominant judicial culture, and they're and that their activism is what people. I mean, Merrick literally tried to undo a 20-year-old drug approval. Yeah, based on a request from a group of doctors who plainly had no standing. And so there's just the idea that they are responding to activism is, I mean, there are, I suppose, things you can say in defense of conservative judicial movement, but not that.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you to go back to in the last 10 minutes of today's show. I want to go back to the subject of Merrick Garland. And you have a somewhat dimmer view of the Justice Department's performance in what you call the white collar cases than I do. But I'm curious what you make of the raw hatred that is thrown the Attorney General's way, and whether you think, if you isolate our disagreement, which is, and by the way, I'm not even sure that I'm right about it, but let's just say you're more convinced that there's a missing year of Justice Department activity than I am. But if we say you're right and I'm wrong, do you think realistically anything turns on that distinction anymore? Or do you agree with me that there's okay, maybe the Justice Department could have gone faster and run faster into the wall that it hit?
Well, I think it has nothing to do with the election result. I don't think trying him and convicting him even of these things would have changed the election result. So there's that. I do believe in justice. The thing you felt in a in a small way, watching the trial in New York, watching him be held to account
Yep.
is something. I don't think that's the strongest case against him. And the fact that he will never be held to account for January 6th is a real, I just can't wrap my head around it. I've seen, more than 1,500 cases brought against the blue collar people, and they're all there because of him. It's all because of his lies. And that he goes scot-free is just like, I can't wrap my head around that.
So
But
I completely agree with
yeah,
that, by the way.
but I think with Merrick Garland, he probably never wanted to bring a case against him. And then because of the cycle of retribution, which was the part of the Supreme Court immunity ruling that did have a basis. And I think his instinct there was, and he went as long as he could. And then once the January 6th committee made it crystal clear that this was not spontaneous, that there was, months of intentional planning and lies and lies and lies and lies, he sort of had no choice. But and it was too late. I assume that his impulse was sort of the same as the justices on the Supreme Court in that respect, that the cycle of retribution was going to be disastrous because, the tit for tat, the ability to create false equivalencies, as we've seen, is just endless. And we're going to, apparently we're going to see it now with the January 6th cases. I think whack jobs are going to try to go against, are going to try to harass the people who testified against him, the officers, the injured officers. I'm really worried about the retribution for. They may try to go against the sedition hunters, the volunteers who turned, to help give tips. And something really ugly is going to take place.
And are you worried that that will be official or that will be just sort of harassment by individuals?
I'm worried that it will have an official component.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've been watching the James Comey hearings for the past 4 years, creating these false alternative narratives to hand to Fox News and to hand to Newsmax and OAN. And that's obviously going to continue in a big way.
Right.
But if they get the Justice Department in their claws, I don't know what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the group of people that I am really worried about are some of them currently work for Jack Smith, but a bunch of them don't. But is the Justice Department prosecutors and FBI people who worked on the investigation that became the January 6th investigation, as well as the classified documents case. I think if you're looking for the full court press, it will be against a bunch of people that we've never heard of in the department who will become, the new Pete Strzok's and the new, think about the people that you'd never heard of who became the brunt of the Durham investigation, right? The
Yeah.
Michael Sussmans and
Yeah.
Kevin Kleinsmiths and Igor Danchenko, whom, by the way, Facebook really wants me to be friends with. I've never met the man, but at least I don't think I've ever met the man. He worked at Brookings many, many years ago, and I may have run into him in the cafeteria or something, but I don't know the guy. But Facebook, every time I log in now, they're like, you might know Igor Danchenko. And so I keep waiting for James Comer to decide that my deep connections to Igor Danchenko require that I, testify before the weaponization committee, because Facebook thinks we should be friends. By the way, Facebook also thinks, I forget who it was that I was, the Russian ambassador, who's now been recalled, and Facebook stopped recommending that we be friends. Speaking of the Russian ambassador, there will be a special military operation this evening. It is the 1000th day of the full-scale war against Ukraine. And the local Ukrainian community, my friends at U.S. Ukrainian Activists, have asked me to project tonight at the Embassy of Russia. I will be there. Folks, come join me. It'll be at 8:30. Somehow after that, I have to get to New York because I have to be in New York at 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Not sure how that's going to work, but I will be there from 8:30, maybe a little bit earlier, a little bit later. And then reminder, there is no show tomorrow. I know somebody's going to show up here and they're going to be like, hey, why isn't there? Where is everybody, guys? I'm telling you now, I told you yesterday, I'm telling you now, there's no show tomorrow. So if you show up, don't blue sky at me. I hate Merrick Garland and there's no show. What's going on? I'm not going to pretend to feel guilty about that. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I will be in a hotel room, getting up, getting dressed, and going to give a speech about the future of the rule of law under the Trump administration.
Can I ask a quick question before we run out of time?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing some things about some real economic dislocation in Russia, finally.
Yes.
Is that for real? It sounds sort of important because I was hearing for a while that things were better than ever over there and that the sanctions had been a complete failure. What's the story?
Yeah, so the story is sanctions have never been a complete failure. The Russian economy has... So one of the things about Russia that people really don't understand, this is one of the societies in the world with the highest income inequality. Unlike, people think income inequality in the United States is a big deal. This is a country with a per capita income before the war, a per capita GDP roughly similar to Mexico. Okay, so it's reasonably wealthy in terms of per capita GDP, $10,000-$12,000 a year. 25% of people don't have plumbing. So you're talking about just extreme wealth inequality. So you can cover up the economic problems by exacerbating that in a society like that you can't do in a society with a more even distribution. Eventually, it catches up with you. And that is, I think, what we're seeing now. And look, when the bottom falls out, it's gonna look, everybody thought it would happen faster than this. But, I forget who said about bankruptcy, it happens slowly and then all of a sudden, right? So it happens slowly until it happens quickly. That's what's happening now. And whether it's a step function or whether it's really the bottom falling out, people have predicted confidently before, I'm not going to do again, but you can't do this forever, right? That's the story of Venezuela, right? You can't just be a gas station and expect to support an economy. That's the resource curse. Look at Nigeria, Venezuela, right? And eventually, and by the way, waging war is really expensive, and they're throwing huge numbers of young male bodies at the problem of Ukraine, and they're, literally hundreds of thousands of people are getting killed, and they're all military casualties. It's not like the other side, which is, suffering a lot of civilian casualties. They're wiping out an enormous number of young, productive men. And so it is a serious thing. Whether it's the thing, I don't know. But we can talk about that tomorrow. Not tomorrow, because there's no show tomorrow. Thursday, we will be back. Join us, folks, for special military operation tonight. You know where we'll be, at the gates of hell. And remember, keep the faith. And 8:00 in the morning is, time for your morning dose of revolutionary activity. Thank you, Roger. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.